It seems like almost every day we hear of new developments with Iran, Syria, or North Korea. Tankers being attacked, chemical weapons being used, and missiles being tested. It's major news right now, but throughout the years, different hotspots have popped up and faded away, like Cuba in the 1960s, Vietnam in the early 70s, Eastern Europe in the 90s, and so on. So where will the next hotspot be? The new great game, to use a phrase used to describe the 19th century confrontation between Russia and the British over Afghanistan. This episode is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. Now this isn't the type of thing I normally advertise, but this game is cool. The graphics just blew my mind. It has an amazing storyline, giant boss battles, hundreds and hundreds of champions to collect and customize. It actually reminds me of those classic RPG and strategy games, but with much better graphics and on your phone. And for anyone, like me, who are old school gamers who just haven't kept up with the latest console games, trust me, it'll come back to you. What really impressed me was, obviously the graphics, but also the storyline. There are seemingly endless battles, events, upgrades, and other things to do. You won't get bored. Check it out, it has almost a perfect score in your app store, with over 1 million downloads. Go down in the video description here, click on the special links, and you will instantly get 50,000 silver and a free epic champion as part of their new player program to start your journey. So give it a try, see for yourself if it stands up to all the hype. You won't be disappointed. This video is going to be mostly from the US perspective, as it is the most likely player to be involved in such a contest. There are 2 locations that have really started to ratchet up in recent years, setting the stage for a future showdown: the Baltics with Russia and the South China Sea with China. Both have been the topic of intense discussion and planning in the Pentagon lately. First, and probably most well known, the South China Sea. The South China Sea is, unsurprisingly, south of mainland China. There are 2 main groups of islands in that sea that several nations claim: the Paracel Islands and the Spratly Islands. The area is strategic for several reasons. An estimated $3.4 trillion worth of trade travels through the sea, accounting for roughly 40% of all Chinese trade and 80% of their energy imports, such as oil and natural gas. There is also believed to be billions and billions of barrels of oil under the sea, still unexplored. China also views this region as an important strategic point from a military perspective. China's navy is almost entirely cut off from the rest of the Pacific Ocean by the Korean Peninsula, Japan and the Okinawa Prefecture, Taiwan, and the Philippines, most of which are aligned with the US. Recent years has seen China become much more assertive in the South China Sea, patrolling, landing, and building forces on these islands, and even creating brand new islands by literally dumping sand into the sea. Several islands have seen massive construction efforts, some of the largest being Fury Cross Reef, which went from virtually nothing but water in early 2014 to becoming a full airbase complete with air defenses, radars, aircraft facilities and a runway, and much more. Mischief Reef, which houses an airbase and related facilities, even larger than the last, and Subi Reef, which in just over a year went from nothing to yet another full airbase, also equipped with air defenses. The air defenses at these sites are interesting, as they're enclosed, protecting them from not only surveillance, but also from exposure to the corrosive seawater. There are also short-range point defenses to defend against cruise missile attacks. Woody Island is another China's built up in recent years. It is located in the Paracel Islands, closer to mainland China. Unlike the others, you can make out a HQ-9 surface-to-air missile system on the island, that in recent years has actually been covered by camouflage netting. The buildup of these islands has caused confrontation with several nations who also claim the area, and have used the area for fishing. Just recently, China reportedly sunk a fishing boat from the Philippines after a collision. China's 9-dash line puts most of the sea within their territory, while the UN has ruled that China has no legal basis to claim the area. The US, Japan, UK, Australia, France, and other countries have conducted freedom of navigation operations, where naval ships are sent to transit the area in defiance against Chinese expansion. Neither side is backing down. As China continues to grow, both as an economic and military power, the stage is set for further tensions, and possibly conflict. One Chinese senior colonel suggested that they should begin ramming US ships that sail by, and in September 2018, a Chinese destroyer got within 40 meters of the USS Decatur. Other Chinese officials have suggested sinking a US aircraft carrier to end these exercises and the will to conduct them, so the area will undoubtedly heat up over the next few years. As for the Baltics, and Eastern Europe as a whole, many developments have taken place. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, many previously Soviet-aligned nations, and even those that once made up part of the Soviet Union, have been brought into the US and Western sphere of influence. In 1990, the heads of several NATO nations assured the head of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, they would not expand NATO eastward, past Germany. At the time, the Soviet Union was hesitant to accept a reunified Germany, especially one that was a member of NATO. To help secure their approval, US Secretary of State James Baker famously stated, "Not 1 inch eastward," when discussing with Gorbachev the expansion of NATO. In 1999, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland joined NATO. Then in 2004, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Bulgaria, Romania, Slovenia, and Slovakia joined NATO as well. While NATO seems to have told the Soviet Union that they would not expand eastward, this was not included formally in any agreement during Germany's reunification. Russia has seen this as a threat, as these countries lie right on their doorstep, only a few hundred miles from the Russian capital of Moscow. In 2006, Georgia began discussions with NATO to join. In April of 2008, members of NATO promised to Georgia that they would eventually join the alliance. 4 months later, the Russian-Georgian War began, where Russian forces invaded the nation, citing the help from separatist groups in 2 regions of the country. Ever since, Russia has occupied those 2 regions, Abkhazia and South Ossetia. There are also pretty well documented cases showing that Russia has been extending the border deeper into Georgian territory. In 2005, the Ukraine entered into discussions to join NATO. The talks continued over the next several years and were extremely divisive among the population, where much of eastern and southern Ukraine are ethnically Russian. Russian President Vladimir Putin called the prospect of Ukraine joining NATO a direct threat to Russia. In 2014, Russian special forces, wearing no insignias, invaded Crimea, securing key locations such as military bases and airports. While first claiming that these troops were not Russian forces and had no control over them, Putin himself later admitted that they were in fact Russian military. Crimea was then annexed after a vote and became part of Russia. Shortly after, a larger civil war broke out in eastern Ukraine, which has also seen Russian military forces take part in. In light of these events, many Eastern European countries have been concerned that they might be next. Regardless if that fear is right or wrong, nations like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are worried Russia might consider the strategic importance of their territories and move in. The Crimea, for example, is extremely valuable, as it gives Russia the ability to exert control over the Black Sea. Estonia, located right at the mouth of the Gulf of Finland, could be used to cut off the major Russian naval base at St. Petersburg. Russia also owns an area of land in Europe separated from the mainland called Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg make up Russia's Baltic fleet. With several NATO nations separating Kaliningrad from the rest of Russia, these nations see themselves as possible targets of Russian expansion. The Estonian government has even told its people to keep food and water rations in the event of war. Russia's military has nearly more enlisted than the entire population of Estonia, and the Estonian defense forces are significantly outmatched. Neither Estonia, Latvia, or Lithuania operate any fighter aircraft, relying solely on NATO in that role. Their navies and ground forces are also extremely limited. Any invasion by Russia would be impossible to stop alone. While being part of a member of NATO means that in the event one nation is attacked, the others will come to its defense, a quick attack and invasion, similar to that of Crimea or Georgia, would likely be over before any real help could arrive, at which point the US and other NATO nations would be in a difficult position on how to respond. Do they want to risk starting World War III by sending in the military to expel Russia from one of these countries? Would it even be possible to contain such a war to the region? For example, if Russian aircraft take off from the Russian mainland, or missiles are being fired from Kaliningrad, you'd almost certainly have to take out those sites. Or would such a confrontation be seen as too costly, and instead allow the occupation and try to deal with Russia through diplomatic means? The US has been developing new strategies for the Baltics, and the larger region as a whole. Troop movements, new air defense plans, and military bases have been set up. Poland has been a very vocal nation in this theater. They recently offered to pay $2 billion toward the cost of a new US airbase in the country, and it looks like now that base is going to be built. The US also recently opened a drone base in Poland. The US Air Force's 52nd Expeditionary Operations Group, Detachment 2, has been operational for a few months now, flying MQ-9 Reapers. NATO runs many exercises in the region, including Baltics, which is presently ongoing at the time of making this video, the US Army in Romania with Sabre Guardian in the Black Sea, among others. Just recently, a US B-52 aircraft went on a simulated bombing run, first flying in a friendly territory, then sharply turning and running straight toward the Crimea, turning away at the last second without violating Russian airspace. The B-52 was intercepted by a Russian Su-27, which the Russian MOD released footage of, but these things cut both ways. While the US and allies say they're worried about Russian aggression, Russia has said the same about the US and their allies. Russia has also flown manned bombers toward US airspace, which are then intercepted by US aircraft. They have also begun to build up forces in the region, which they say is in response to these provocations by NATO. Iskander short-range ballistic missile bases have been set up in Kaliningrad over the last couple years. Their 500-kilometer range puts them within striking distance of nearly all of Poland, including the Aegis Ashore missile defense site being built in the country. This site has long been accused by Russia of having the ability to hold land attack cruise missiles, something that would have violated the INF Treaty. This is because the Aegis Ashore system uses the same Mark 41 vertical launch cells to hold the SM-3 missiles that are used on naval ships, which can also hold the SM-3, but also the Tomahawk cruise missile. Since the US withdrawal from the treaty in February of 2019, due to what they say was multiple Russian violations of that treaty, the idea of placing cruise missiles at these sites has become a possibility, as it would no longer be violating any treaty. So these two spots are bound to continue heating up over the next decade. With neither side backing down, there is virtually no doubt tensions will continue to escalate. Hopefully, they'll be able to refrain from escalating into a full-scale confrontation.